What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp Podcast. I am here with nobody. It is just me, myself, and I today. And this episode is just going to be our regular season wrap-up. There's obviously still some games left to be played to this point, but the playoffs are starting Saturday night. We know all the teams in the playoffs. We don't know the matchups for one division yet, which is the West Division. We know the matchups for the North is going to be the Toronto Maple Leafs playing the Montreal Canadiens and the Edmonton Oilers playing the Winnipeg Jets. We know the matchups in the East is going to be the Pittsburgh Penguins playing the New York Islanders and the Washington Capitals playing the Boston Bruins. We know the matchups for the Central Division is going to be the Carolina Hurricanes playing the Nashville Predators and the Florida Panthers playing the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the matchups for the West Division are still yet to be determined. The St. Louis Blues will be playing whoever ends up in first place. Right now, there's a race between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Colorado Avalanche. Technically speaking, the Minnesota Wild can still also jump the Avs. Right now, the Wild have 75 points with 54 games played. The Avs have 78 with 54 games played, and the Golden Knights have 80 with 55. So the Avs can get up to 82 points. The Vegas Golden Knights can max out at 82, and the Minnesota Wild can max out at 79. So the top three spots are still yet to be determined, but the Blues are going to end up playing whoever's in first place. So at some point, hopefully soon, we will be doing a playoff prediction / preview episode, but since the West is unfortunately still not settled, we won't be able to do that yet. So this episode is just going to be, and now keep in mind, of course, the way we record these is we record these the day before they're uploaded. So I'm recording this May 12th around 8 p.m. So obviously Vegas and Colorado both play tonight. I'm not entirely sure who holds the tiebreaker between Vegas and Colorado should Colorado win and Vegas win and Colorado get to 82. I'm not entirely sure who ends up holding the tiebreaker. Regulation overtime wins. It would be Colorado. It might be Vegas because Vegas has 38 regulation overtime wins. Colorado has 33. So it's difficult to tell. You can't really... it's regulation wins is actually tiebreaker. They did update that. So right now the Colorado Avalanche would have the tiebreaker. So if Vegas and Colorado both tie, Colorado would win the West. So still up in the air, yet to be determined. Not really entirely sure at this point who would hold that distinction. So that being said, we're just going to wrap up the regular season and kind of just do our general, what did this season really mean to us? Or I guess I should say mean to me, since it's just me today. What will I remember this regular season for? And, I just want to give a congratulations to everyone that made this season possible, basically. From our frontline healthcare workers to, people on staff at the arenas to the team trainers and the players, the staff, and also we can't forget the families of the players who I'm sure made this season easier on the players. I'm sure that, there was plenty of grocery trips or other necessary things that involved going out that families took care of. So just want to thank them as well. Just anybody really that had a hand at all in making this season essentially even possible from the start. Because if you guys remember, I was talking at the beginning of the season, I was very nervous about a lot of things. And I'm still nervous going into the playoffs, but there's still work to be done. But, really, it's just an accomplishment of the league, the players, families, like I said, really anybody that helped to make this season a reality at all, period. You guys should be applauded. And give yourself a pat on the back, because this was a massive undertaking. I mean, 56 games with 31 teams. It's not as simple as it might seem to be. So just want to give everyone a congratulations on that. Everyone that really had any part in anything to do with the season, really, should be. You should be proud of the effort you put in. So that being said, what will I remember this season for? I mean, this has been a very, very interesting season, and I think the thing I'm going to remember this season for the most part is it's a season both of triumph and of momentous occasions, as well as a season of great, great controversy. I mean, there were several very, very high highs during this season, from the outdoor games that there had to be an audible called, and then they had to switch the time, so that was great, on the fly thinking by the NHL. But the outdoor games, to the breaking of records like Patrick Marleau establishing a new games played record, to some notable players' retirement, such as Ryan Miller, who retired as the winningest American-born goaltender of all time. Conor McDavid's achievement in putting up 100 points, and I think it was something like 53 games. Austin Matthews' achievement of scoring over 40 goals in a shortened season. Just plenty of momentous occasions this year that are things that should be celebrated within our game. But this season was also not without, I think, more controversy than I can remember any single season ever really having. I mean, there's been so much controversy this year, starting from the Tony DeAngelo situation with the Rangers, to the PLD Patrick Laine situation, which, I mean, you could argue that's not really a controversy. That's just a player wanting to get traded. But then when we end up looking at the development of Patrick Laine and Max Domi in Columbus, you can make a fair argument that Tortorella's last year in Columbus, which I will get to that eventually, but this was his final year in Columbus. There's some controversy surrounding the team specifically, and how John Tortorella was handling these players, to, I mean, literally anything to do with Jack Eichel and the Buffalo Sabres, which is still ongoing. They had that press conference the other day with Jack. Apparently the team doesn't want him to get some surgery that he wants to get, and I think he's made it incredibly, incredibly clear at this point that he wants out of Buffalo. And there's also the Alexander Ovechkin and other Russian players on the Capitals breaking protocol. Name anything to do basically with Tom Wilson at all, between the hit on Brendan Carlo to his hit on Bushnevich and Panarin. Ovechkin, being fined for spearing Trent Frederick. There was the Artemi Panarin incident with the political connections with Russia. So it was just, a very interesting season. And no NHL season ever is without its fair share of controversies. But I just think we saw a very high number of higher profile controversies, such as, the Rangers calling out George Parros' job, or Artemi Panarin having to leave the game for a little bit because of political reasons. We just saw some very odd and unusual types of controversies this year. So, I'm always going to remember this season in particular for, obviously, the realigned divisions kind of being funky. Some very entertaining games. Some unfortunately unbalanced divisions, I will say. I mean, they had to do what they had to do with the geography available, so I can't really pin that on the National Hockey League. But, this regular season to me was fun. I enjoyed watching the games, especially because we did get a lot of, well, not a lot, all within the division. So, getting to watch Toronto, Montreal, or, Calgary, Edmonton 8 times a year was interesting, and it was certainly a treat. But I am ready for the divisions to go back to normal. I will say that I would not be a proponent of keeping the divisions this way. I don't think it's balanced at all, and the balancing of the divisions, that comes and goes as teams get better. And teams get worse. Obviously, some divisions become stronger, some divisions become weaker, as a natural ebb and flow in the development cycle of these franchises. There's nothing new about that. That's how it always goes. A couple of years ago, you can make the argument that the Atlantic Division was the strongest division in hockey, and then now I think, or the Central Division for a long time was arguably the strongest division in hockey, whereas now I think there's a very, very, very compelling argument to be made for what was the Metro Division to be the most competitive division in hockey. So it's just, the ebb and flow of teams, but I would not be a fan of keeping the teams the way they are, just because I think we need to separate all the Canadian teams. I think, as cool as it is to see these teams go play head to head, I mean, first of all, for time zones, it won't make any sense. The time zones would be just a disaster for the Canadian division. And second of all, there's been a lot of Canadian teams that have interesting rivalries with American teams more so than their Canadian counterparts. So I think the divisions need to go back to the way they were to reestablish all those rivalries. And then obviously, you were also missing those inter-division games. But I will remember this season for just the weirdness, the wackiness, the divisions being the way they are, the controversies. But also, like I said, this season was not without its high points for sure. And even a season marred by COVID cases and teams missing entire weeks of games like the Vancouver Canucks. And it's going to be weird because the playoffs are going to be starting, and yet the Canucks and the Flames are going to be playing each other. So it's weird. And I think it's about as weird as you would expect a COVID season to be. The other thing I'm going to remember about this season is that this has kind of been the season of teams coming to a head, teams coming to inflection points. And I think that this season is going to be an inflection point for several teams, not just limited to not just limited to teams that lost coaches, but specifically, the New York Rangers, who fired every single coach except Benoit Allaire, the Columbus Blue Jackets, who let go of John Tortorella, the Arizona Coyotes, who let go of Rick Tocchet. There's a lot of teams that right now are at inflection points. I mean, obviously we saw earlier in the year Calgary made a coaching change. There's just a lot of teams like the Rangers, the Flames, the Jackets are all at decision points. For some teams like the Rangers, it's a decision of, well, we wanted to make the playoffs this year. We need to commit to making the playoffs. But how far do we commit? And that's something Chris Drury is going to have to figure out. Is this a team that's ready to compete now? Does he start investing in older players on the market? Does he start holding the younger players more accountable than he would have otherwise? Does he start looking for a coach that's not known as a nurturer, but known as somebody who gets teams over the hump? With the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Calgary Flames, you're kind of at an opposite point. You're a team that has a relatively competitive roster that should have been competing this year that didn't. What do? Do you commit to a rebuild? Do you try to sign these older players? Do you do a on the fly retool. You let some of these older players walk in free agency and try to replace them with younger players that will sustain the franchise. So there's a lot of teams right now that are very, very odd points where they can really go one way or the other. And I mean, honestly, if you ask me, a team like the Coyotes needs to just essentially tear it down and rebuild. I know they kind of did already, but they have this weird like amalgamation of older players from other teams like Phil Kessel, Derek Brassard, Derek Stepan, young players from within like Clayton Keller, Connor Garland, Jacob Chikrin, and just, whatever they've tried clearly, to the point hasn't worked. And I don't really see them having the resources with which to basically complete a whole roster on their own going into next season. So I think that they need to just commit to a rebuild. The Flames, I mean, it's difficult because, listen, when you hire a guy like Daryl Sutter, you're not going to rebuild, right? I think that that's the indication that Calgary has given the league at this point, saying, well, we hired a coach that's known as a competitor and a coach that's not exactly known for really nurturing young guys. He's known as somebody that holds everyone like very, very accountable. So, I mean, you don't hire Daryl Sutter and then immediately launch into a rebuild. So the Flames are obviously, to me, a team that is going to end up trying to compete next year, which I think they should. The Rangers are in a similar position. I honestly think the Rangers should go after Gerard Gallant. Now, I don't know if he's really going to be available because I think that he would be a great fit for the Seattle Kraken as well. I mean, not just because it just so happened that the last team he experienced massive success was also a expansion team, but he's always been a coach that is able to take a team that is maybe not the most talented roster in the league, but get every ounce out of them in a symbiotic relationship, I'll say. Coaches like John Tortorella have a reputation for getting every last ounce out of every player they have out of their guys, but not because of any, give and take relationship. It's very much I'm going to say these things, you're going to do these things, and if you're not going to do these things, you will not be playing as much. And Tortorella holds everyone accountable, which is how he gets his players to perform, honestly, beyond what their capabilities are sometimes. Whereas Gerard Gallant is seen more as a player's coach, and I think that's going to be good for an expansion team of guys who, I'm not saying, because we don't really know at this point exactly what the Kraken are going to end up with. It's really hard to say, but I think the general consensus, obviously, with most expansion teams is not that they're going to be talent poor, but that they won't be talent rich. And I think a coach like Gerard Gallant, who took a roster in Florida, say, for example, when he was there, and he took a team that was maybe not the most talented team on the planet, but he got them to compete and he pushed them to a playoff spot, which they hadn't had in a long time. And just the general way he took a team that not a lot of people really took all that seriously in Florida, and he got them to do things that nobody thought they could do. Now, they didn't, win a Stanley Cup or anything, but he also then took a team in Vegas that wasn't talent poor. It was a team of a lot of essentially overpaid second liners and third liners. There really wasn't a whole lot of terrible players, but I mean, he got them to compete for a Stanley Cup the first year. Now, of course, that was aided by some intelligent free agent signings, but he has a way of making sure that even if you're not, the most talented team in the league or the most experienced team in the league or even a team that has a super high level of chemistry, he's able to get the most out of those guys. And I think that would be a great fit for the New York Rangers, honestly, just because they are a very talented team. The Rangers really are. But they have obvious gaps, I would say, in terms of their roster building. And I think a guy like Gallant, who has a reputation for not only being a player's coach and nurturing young guys, which would help with the development of guys like Capo Caco, Philip Hedl, Alexis Lafreniere, but also able to get the most out of his older players, or not even older players, but get the most out of everyone, can maybe take the Rangers' defensive game to the next level. He can maybe, shore up some system deficiencies, I would say, that we saw with David Quinn. And I think he'd be a little bit more of a steadier hand in the development of the young guys, which honestly probably could have helped the Rangers down a stretch if the younger guys were given more of a longer leash earlier in the season than they got with David Quinn. So I think Gerard Gallant would be a great fit, but it would not surprise me to see Gallant take a job with Seattle. I think it also really wouldn't surprise me to see John Tortorella take a job with Seattle, because for as kind of explosive and high profile as his departure in Columbus has been, John Tortorella is still a fantastic coach. I mean, there's no bones about it. The guy is arguably, in my opinion, a top 3 coach in the NHL. In my opinion, if the top 3 coaches in the league are Barry Trotz, I think, is the best coach in the NHL. I might be biased on that, but I think he genuinely is. I think Trotz is up there. I think Tortorella's up there. And then honestly, you can make a strong argument for some guys like Mike Sullivan being up there. And the work he's done with Pittsburgh has been nothing short of impressive. Peter Laviolette has to be up there. So, I mean, Tortorella is a fantastic coach. There's no beating around the bush with that. But his time in Columbus, unfortunately with the Rangers, it kind of just seems like at some point he just has an expiration date, in that, maybe he pushes too hard for too long and the players start to disengage with his system. And then when you're such a system-driven coach, if the players disengage from your system, it's over. There's nothing left. So I just think Tortorella would be a good fit for the Seattle Kraken on the basis of it's important to establish that winning culture early on in your franchise's existence, because that is ultimately what stays with a franchise long beyond when a coach is there. And we see it certain franchises. You ever wonder, do you ever wonder why the Red Wings were so competitive for so long, or why it seems like the teams like the Bruins and the Blackhawks and the Penguins are always competing? And that's because they have winning cultures. When you have a coach that steps in and says, this is what the team is going to be, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to act, and this is a standard we're going to hold each other to, long past when that coach is fired, your team has a reputation. When players go to play for the Pittsburgh Penguins, they know they're going to have to match that winning culture. They know that when they look down the bench and they see 87 across the bench, they can't let up because he doesn't take a shift off. And even when Crosby's hurt, even if Crosby's not on the bench, Crosby's up in the press box. When you go to a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins, you're like, all right, we got to win. We got to compete. I got to bring it every night. And I think that's a big difference between some of these teams. Some of these teams have established a winning culture. No offense, to any fans of any teams I'm about to name, but, I'll pick on the Islanders to start. For a long time after, Al Arbor and Bill Torrey era, really after the early 2000s, the team's culture turned to, well, we're just going to make the best of a bad situation. So we didn't really have any talent, we didn't really have any great players, and we were just finishing last every single year. And players and free agents were coming here and going, all right, well, it's just kind of a vacation, it's a pit stop, and I'll get traded out of here at the trade deadline. I think a lot of teams for a long time treated the Arizona Coyotes that way. All right, well, we don't really have a tradition here. I'm just going to go here, try to rack up some points, and get traded out of here. But, obviously, even teams like the Blackhawks during the last couple years when they weren't as competitive, they still had that tradition of, elite talent and doing their best to actually make the best of a bad situation, not what the Islanders were doing, where it was just like, oh, I'll just get traded out of here, right? Like the Blackhawks weren't just signing players just to trade them, So it's important early on to establish a culture around your franchise of accountability and a winning culture. And a coach like Tortorella does that. You don't want to start your franchise off with some ho-hum coach who's not going to hold anybody accountable, because then that stink, that odor can linger. Coaches and captains can change a franchise's personality for sure, but you don't want to start off on the wrong foot. So it wouldn't surprise me to see the Kraken take a shot at John Tortorella, if nothing else, just to kind of establish early on, like I said, that culture that surrounds the team, which is ever so important. And there are some other interesting things that happened this year. I mean, of course, next year is going to be the introduction of the Seattle Kraken. So there's a lot of interesting moves being made here and there in anticipation of that. And I'm very excited for the Kraken expansion draft to happen. Very much looking forward to seeing what happens there. And, this season, it's just very interesting. I don't really know. I don't know how to describe it, just because it was so bizarre. And I mean, we knew that going into it, the whole thing, that it was a COVID season. It was going to be weird with no bubble, but all divisional games. And yet, I think it surpassed even our expectations in terms of weirdness. If we want to talk about surprises, I would say I was very surprised that St. Louis played as bad as they did. I mean, listen, you don't replace your captain, Alex Pietrangelo, but, by the same token, Torrey Krug isn't that much of a downgrade that they should have gone from probably what I would consider borderline Stanley Cup contenders to barely even being a playoff team. I'm surprised that the Dallas Stars had as much trouble as they did. I mean, look, them missing the playoffs, like, we knew that they had injuries coming into the season. We knew that they were going to struggle with certain things. But to go from Stanley Cup finals to not even making the playoffs, I mean, their final win-loss ratio is 23-33. They lost 14 15 games in overtime. I mean, if you even win half of those, you're in the playoffs. So that's just a very bizarre season for them. But, I shouldn't say I'm surprised at the Florida Panthers. I do believe I picked them to miss the playoffs. I did. I put them outside of the playoffs. But, that was just more because I didn't like the offseason that they had. When you get goaltending the way they were from Chris Driedger, Sergei Bobrovsky, and, even the latest Spencer Knight, I mean, it's a recipe for success because it was goaltending that they just flat out simply were not getting last year. Flyers, I mean, being as bad as they were was definitely a surprise. I mean, we've talked in detail over and over and over again about the Philadelphia Flyers and just their inability to really defend at all, period, point blank, full stop. Just been a bizarre situation for them. And I think obviously they need to really investigate whether or not they want to continue on with their current coaching situation. So I guess I'll kind of wrap up. It's going to be a bit of a shorter episode, but I guess I'll kind of wrap up talking about some awards. So the Hart Trophy, I mean, listen, the winner is going to be Conor McDavid. I'm just going to put that out there, that Conor McDavid is going to win the Hart Trophy. He shouldn't, in my opinion, but he will. If I had to pick a winner of the Hart Trophy, I'm still going with our boy, Patrick Kane. I'm still going to give it to him on the basis that he had 66 points in 56 games, 51 assists, and playing with who? I mean, Pius Suter for a large part of the season. I mean, nothing against him, but no Jonathan Toews, no Kirby Dach for most of the season, no Toews for the entire season. I mean, I would either give it to Patrick Kane or Austin Matthews. I mean, 40 goals in 50 games? Are you kidding me? But we all know it's going to go to Conor McDavid because he put up 104 points in 55 games. And all anyone else on his team did was, Draisaitl only put up 83 points in 55 games. Yeah, so give me a friggin' break. And that's not to take anything away from McDavid, but I can't make an argument for him when the other players on his team were doing things like also putting up 83 points. I mean, the most valuable player to his team is the way that it's written. And if you take Patrick Kane off the Blackhawks, they're not even friggin' close to a playoff spot. They just aren't. I mean, period, point blank, full stop. Take Patrick Kane off the Blackhawks, and that brief period of time when they were competing for a Stanley Cup. God, sorry, guys. I need to... Hold on. Let me take a drink and reset my brain for a second. That brief period of time when they were competing for a playoff spot was basically all because of Kevin Lankinen and Patrick Kane. If you take Conor McDavid off the Edmonton Oilers, the next closest guy has 83 points. Still pretty freaking good. If you take Patrick Kane off the Chicago Blackhawks, like I said, Patrick Kane ended up, only scoring 15 goals, which is definitely low for him, but dishing out the assists. You take off Patrick Kane, you have Dominic Kubalik with 56 points, and then you have, or DeBrincat with 56, and then the next closest guy is Kubalik with 38. I mean, no offense, but 56 points in 52 games from Alex DeBrincat is not 89 points from Leon Draisaitl. Just isn't. So I know it's going to go to Conor McDavid, but if you gave me the option I'm giving it to Patrick Kane. Just throwing that out there. We talk about Norris contention. I think Victor Hedman should get a serious look. Third in the league in points, 45 points in 54 games, and doing everything that you expect out of your defenseman. Only +5, which is kind of weird, but you expect that plus to be a little bit better out of Victor Hedman. But the Lightning had an interesting season, end up in third place. They kind of struggled. Down the stretch. Not down the stretch, but they had a tough division. But Victor Hedman playing 25 minutes a game, still putting up 45 points. Can't really argue that too much, I don't think. I think Adam Fox should get a nod. I think another guy you can maybe give a nod to is Jacob Chikrin, 41 points in 56 games. Yes, he's a -6, but he also played on a team that had a rough start, and he logs 23 minutes of ice time. 18 goals for Jacob Chikrin. It's kind of crazy on an Arizona Coyotes team that didn't really score a whole lot. So if you gave me the option to hand out the award, I'm probably going to hand it to Victor Hedman, but wouldn't surprise me if Adam Fox or Jacob Chikrin get a look. I'm sure they'll also talk about Tyson Barrie and his 48 points, but again, playing on the Oilers, so whoop-de-doo. The Vezina is an interesting one. I think the Vezina has a lot of really good talent up for it this year. Obviously, Vasilevsky's going to get talked about, a 9.25 and a 2.21. Philip Grubauer played in 38 games and won 29 of them, which is crazy. With a 9.21 and a 2.0 flat. I think he should definitely get put in that discussion. Connor Hellebuck with a 2.60 and a 9.15. Again, the only reason why the Winnipeg Jets are even close to where they are, really the only reason why they're even remotely in a discussion of competing for a Stanley Cup is because of this man. I would like to see Semyon Varlamov get a nod with his 7 shutouts, his 2.04 and a 9.29. Maybe not as many games played for him with the 35, splitting the time with Sorokin, but I think you could give any of these guys really a good look. If you had to ask me who I want to hand it to, I honestly might just give it to Grubauer, just because going 29-9-1 is ridiculous, first of all. And it's not like he's on a super great team defensively. The Avalanche traded away their hard hitter this year. They traded away Nikita Zadorov. So they kind of ended up getting a little bit less fierce on the back end. You have guys like Sammy Girard and Cale Makar, Devon Tays, these guys that kind of bring the offense. And you have guys like Ryan Graves, Eric Johnson, maybe a little bit more on the defensive side of things. But, all things considered, this team, I would say, is only average defensively. I wouldn't exactly say it's one of the better defensive teams. They get a lot of offense from their defense for sure, which is only going to increase with guys like Bowen Byram getting consistent playing time. But I honestly might give it to Phillip, just because, even on a team that's as good as the Abs are, those numbers are still crazy. I think as an Abs fan, out of your goalies, you accept a 2.5 and a 9.10. So for Philip Grubauer to end up with a 9.21 and a 2 flat is, it's kind of crazy, and that record is bananas. So I would say Grubauer should get a look. Maybe Hellebuck. I would like Varley to get talked about, but there's a lot of really good goalies this year. And you can throw Saros' name in there with a 9.27 and a 2.28. Especially down the stretch after that absolutely horrendous start his team had. So, definitely a lot of good talent in the goaltending department this year. So, Jack Adams for Coach of the Year. I mean, I would honestly give it to Coach Q. Sauce that over to Joel Quenneville for the things he did with the Florida Panthers this year. They had just an incredible year. I mean, they end up being over the Tampa Bay Lightning in the standings, which is something that I certainly didn't anticipate. I thought the Lightning were just going to walk away with this division. So for the Panthers to only end up 1 point behind the Carolina Hurricanes and end up 1 point behind potentially, with a max of being 3 points behind the President's Trophy winner is crazy. Especially after the offseason that they had. I mean, you lose Mike Hoffman for nothing, basically. Well, not basically. I mean, they let Mike Hoffman walk away. So they lose Mike Hoffman. I wasn't thrilled with them letting some of their defensemen walk. So I think Quenneville should definitely get a look there at Coach of the Year. It would honestly, I think, make the most sense. Obviously, you can also talk about Rod Brindamore, coach of the Carolina Hurricanes for doing what he did, or the coach of the Minnesota Wild, who unfortunately his name just flew right out of my head. Dean Evason of the Minnesota Wild should get a look at, because the things that he did with this team this year are fantastic. So, definitely some guys that could be up for some awards that deserve it. So I think I'm going to end it there, just kind of giving you my general thoughts about what this season represented, some awards and some other things. Like I said, stay tuned to the channel. We're going to try to do I guess you could call it a playoff prediction episode on Saturday before the playoffs actually start, before the puck drops for those. So yeah, we'll call it a playoff prediction. So stay tuned. I'm going to try to do playoff preview / prediction before the playoffs start. And unfortunately, we might not be able to do so. And if we can't do a playoff prediction before the playoffs start, we will definitely do it early on in the playoffs before things get too crazy. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys again next time.